I-V-M.
Classically in India, we would not put anything on our skin unless tested and tried. That's the reason why legacy brands ruled the roost when it came to personal care products in India for decades. But today you can see that there's a big boom in direct-to-consumer personal care products. For a consumer that wouldn't move an inch without trying and testing anything, how are these direct-to-consumer brands being able to build trust? And that too in an online world? Are the fundamentals of how these direct-to-consumer startup brands are being built different from those of legacy brands? And what do legacy brands such as Unilever, Procter & Gamble and GSK have to learn from the world of this up-and-coming direct-to-consumer brands? Well, there's a startup idea on every dining table in India today. But how do you build successful startup brands in India? Is technology the only space that investors are chasing? What would get you funded if you have a consumer brand idea in your mind? Our guest today has spent more than 2 decades building consumer businesses in India with Ponds, Unilever, Dabur, and the last 5 years investing in startup brands such as Mamaearth, Boat, Kapiva, Yoga Bar and so on. Welcome to Speak Easy with Dheeraj Sinha, and today I'm talking to Kannan Sitaram, venture partner at Fireside Investment. Kannan and I are going to discuss what's really behind this upsurge in D2C consumer brands and how to make them successful, and what do venture capitalists look for while funding these brands. Kannan, welcome to Speak Easy with Dheeraj Sinha. Kannan, welcome to my podcast. Great to have you today, and I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah, likewise, Dheeraj. Looks like an exciting set of questions that we want to talk through on the whole world of D2C.
Yeah. So, when I look at you, I know you've spent so much of time with big companies, big brands, building all of that through your career and your life. And now you are helping direct to consumer brands being built as part of Fireside Ventures. So to my mind, you exactly embody the transition that our economy is going through, right? On one hand, we have the established traditional big brands, and on the other hand, we have the younger, newer brands snapping on the heels. And it's a very, very interesting kind of polarity that we are seeing in the world of brands, economy, new economy and traditional economy. And that's where I'd like to kind of rivet our conversation today.
Sure. It's been my world for the last 4 years. So it's been a journey of, in many ways, reinvention. I had to throw away a lot of what I held to be the gospel truth of building brands and scaling brands and things of that kind. So yes, it's a completely different way of thinking about building brands, about getting to understand consumers, thinking about solutions for customers. All of that is actually fundamentally different in this world.
Yeah, and that's the exciting part, right? The fact that the rules are being rewritten, right? And obviously, I think a large part of that, Kannan, also is acknowledging that the rules are different, because a lot of time being on the brand side or being on the consulting side, we struggle with because people still want to go back to the older rules. And one aspect that I want to start the conversation with, probing your mind on, off late, I've been obsessed with this idea of speed. Right. And growing up thinking brands and businesses, none of the frameworks ever taught you that you got to think about speed when you're launching a brand, that you got to think about speed when you're building a range. Right. But over a period of time, I realized that speed is not just required, it's critical for success, especially in a market like India, because consumers are quick to judge. Right. And my experience has been that, in fact, India is not a bell curve, it's an elephant curve, as I call it, that you have to rise very, very quickly and get to a certain degree of adoption, or you will get branded as a failure. And once you're a failure, nobody wants to touch you. So like a classical bell curve, we don't have the time to go through early majority, late majority, the whole works that's been taught to us, right? I mean, I was having a conversation with Adam Morgan, who runs his whole Challenger brand setup, and he was discussing how Discovery is snapping on the heels of Netflix, and Netflix built a category and perhaps hasn't moved fast enough to the next level. And there you have a behemoth who's caught up with you and is now snapping on your heels. So I want to discuss with you that how important, I mean, and we know that, earlier it used to take 15 years to build a unicorn, and today it takes 4 years, 5 years to build a unicorn, right? So let's discuss the idea of speed. How important is it? Is it dangerous at times? Where are you in your mind on that issue?
No, absolutely. In fact, the whole topic of unicorns is a large topic in itself. So, and how these unicorns valued, what makes them valuable, all of that. But leaving that aside, speed is a very defining metric in this world. And the first aspect of speed is what you've mentioned, that what used to take 10, 12 years is now done in 3, 4 years. And I'm talking about building a decent sized brand which has got consumer love going for it. In the good old days, people used to take a lot of time to get that right. Today, I see strong consumer brands being built in 3, 4 years. And of course, the defining architecture for that has been the way at which internet has rolled out in the country, which again has been helped by the very low cost of data in our country, probably the lowest in the world, and the fact that smartphones are available at significantly lower prices. People say there are some 500, 600 million internet users today in this country. And then they're consuming content on their smartphones through cheap data. They are on Facebook, they are on Instagram, they are on YouTube. And all of that is creating rapidly, they're creating demand for new solutions to problems perhaps that they didn't know they had before, right? So all of that is one reason why speed has been a defining metric in this area. But brands are also responding in very different ways to this whole demand for moving faster. In my previous avatar in what I call legacy FMCG companies, we used to sweat 6 months to produce a nice 30-second ad. Today, you produce ads every week, and you don't do these long link tests and so on to confirm whether the consumer is able to get what you want them to get. You go on air, put it out there, within 2, 3 days, you know which ad is better, right? So that means that the whole speed at which you're creating communication has just moved to a completely different level. That's also true of the speed at which you're launching products. Again, going back to the legacy companies, there was a whole protocol around product testing, concept come product testing, simulated test markets, etc., before you put the product out into the market. And of course, there was extensive approvals which are required because large sums of money were involved in launching a new product. Today, the startup wants to launch a new product. They go to their manufacturing partner and say, hey, this is my idea. Can you develop this product for me? And the partner has their own R&D facility. They develop this product. The startup says, I don't want 1 million pieces of it. I want 1,000 pieces of it. Gets 1,000, puts it on their website, puts out some ads. Within a week, they know whether there is consumer traction for it or not. So again, speed is, as you rightly call it out, a strongly defining metric for scale up, but also for very classical brand development processes.
Yeah, I mean, even things like trust, right? I mean, we were taught that, it takes decades to build trust, but I would imagine that there is some degree, may not be a degree to put your life in the hands of the brands, but there's some degree of trust that consumers are reposing in all these brands which have come up in last 3 years, 4 years times, right? I mean, you have skincare brands, people are putting it on their skin, which people thought was the most sensitive element of their body to ever experiment with. So I'm sure even ideas like trust are getting built in some degree in shorter periods of time for these kind of traction to happen.
Interestingly, I think the notion of trust has changed. I think a lot of what we call trust with the legacy brands was a lot of familiarity. But today, when we think of consumers, the consumers are in a different world of awareness. They have the confidence to assess products, what goes into products. They have the ability to refer to Google. And therefore, actually, I find that today's consumers are diligencing products like they never used to before. In the good old days, it was like, the government wants you to put certain disclosures, you put it in the back of pack. But today, consumers are reading back of pack. They want to know what goes into a product. And they're discovering that many of the legacy brands are putting stuff into products that actually they are very uncomfortable with as consumers. And therefore, that breeds actually a lack of trust in brands that they were very familiar with. And they find that the new age brands are actually operating very differently. They are disclosing. They say, hey, this is what goes into our products, right? We don't have this, we don't have that, and you can believe us. And consumers go check it out and they realize, yeah, that is true. These brands are telling us the truth. And therefore, trust is being built through transparency and not just familiarity.
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic insight, because you're saying trust is no more a function of time. It's a function of transparency, honesty, authenticity, right? So the whole axis on which you build trust is changed dramatically. And that's a fascinating insight. I mean, that segues me to the next question, where I want to probe a bit on, how different is this whole D2C space? Is there real innovation? Are we unlocking new ideas? Are we unlocking new cohorts? Or is it largely just the channel which is different? Is it like we've just taken the same old formula, product packaging, and put it on a different D2C channel and not riding the traditional distribution network? Is that the only difference? Or do you feel there's a whole slew of innovation which is happening in this space?
It's fundamentally different. It's not just a channel. And let me start articulating what are some of the fundamental differences. The legacy brands are built for scale, right? And not just at the brand level, but throughout the business model. You start with saying, I'm going to spend a lot of money on the brand. Second, you say that I want to be available in, let's say, 1 million outlets in this country. Your factories run lines which work on a single SKU for multiple days. You go to a supplier and you say, I want to buy, 1 million pieces of packaging material of this. So the whole thing is geared towards optimizing around scale. And they look at what's the least cost business model which will work. And therefore, when you have that as your mindset, you're kind of saying, I'll pick the big opportunities in the market. And therefore, I will build brands and solutions for those big opportunities. And when you talk big opportunities, therefore, you're averaging a whole bunch of consumers, right? In the new world where you're talking directly to consumers, where you're working through e-commerce channels, you're actually in a position where you can target micro segments. It may not yet be a segment of one, but I think somewhere in the distant future, we are talking about not just direct to consumer, you're talking direct to one. Okay. And there are already some sort of initial kind of thought processes which are, I think, inevitably moving brands to saying, I want to find that one consumer whom I can service, and I'll work out the economics of everything else differently. So, for example, they don't own manufacturing assets, most of them. They work with suppliers of finished goods, right? They don't own warehouses. They work with people who do that extremely well. They don't own the supply mechanism to consumers. They work with people who do that well. They work with payment gateways who handle the whole payment piece. The basic framework on which their website sits to do e-commerce is again not owned by them, right? So there are a whole bunch of partnerships which are transforming the way brands are reaching out to much smaller segments of consumers. And I think that's a very big fundamental change in the way the whole brand thinking or opportunity thinking is getting reconfigured.
Yeah. So this is very interesting. I will probe a little bit more, Kannan, on this. So, I mean, earlier days, right? I mean, Unilever, P&G. I mean, they were strong because they had such a muscle power in the market. I mean, your distribution was your first call to action, and you were strong because you could dominate media, and you had a strong sales force on ground. And you're saying a lot of that is now getting outsourced, right? And there are other specialists who are plugging those systems. So the question then to my mind is, what then is the criteria for success? What, I mean, is it your ability to spot an opportunity? Is opportunity mapping the biggest criteria of success? Is being able to connect with your consumer? So has the whole game shifted to that and liberated you from owning a manufacturing process and a distribution process? What do you think is the fulcrum of success for these brands then?
No, very interesting because and I've been thinking about what has changed and what has not changed.
Yeah.
And in my view, the fundamentals of what makes a brand have not changed. Right? You still need a strong consumer insight. You still need to have the best solution for that insight. You still need to convince the consumer that your solution is the best. So for me, at least at the very basic brand strategy kind of level, I don't think things have changed. However, how you connect to the consumer is very different because today, at least the millennial consumer, and I think even the not so millennial consumer, are spending less and less time in front of a television set, or under 30 years old, you don't read a newspaper, right? So now, how do you connect with them? They are on their phones and they're consuming a lot of content out there, right? They are on Instagram, and the number of hours per day on Instagram and YouTube, etc., is just increasing. And especially in these lockdown days and so on, even more time is being spent on social media. So that's really the place to connect. How you connect there is again very different, right? Because, they don't have 30 seconds to give you. On YouTube, 5 seconds. Within those 5 seconds, you got to connect, otherwise you're off, right? So all those metrics of how you connect there are completely different. The whole notion of communities is very, very important because you're talking to people who share an interest. And you're looking at how to market to that community, but you're also looking at how to get feedback from that community. So the very successful digital brands are people who build strong communities to both tell them what they're going to offer, but also to get insights from them. So how you mine insights is different. You mine insights by looking at social approval ratings. And you have technology which does that for you. You don't go knocking on doors saying, can I fill up a questionnaire, right? You crawl through all the Amazon ratings and say, hey, this is what people are unhappy about. Can I give them a solution which builds on that unhappiness and solves that, right? So how you connect, how you get insights, how you develop products basis those insights are all very, very important for successful execution of what fundamentally is the same strategy.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And I think what I'm also gathering is a lot more focus now on connecting with consumer, getting insights, rather than, obviously I'm sure there's a lot of logistics management, but lesser, at least capital expenditure on some of those aspects, and more expenditure on consumer, which is the real game here. I mean, that segues me to another thought, Kannan. I mean, We talk about the new consumer being detail oriented, conscious consumer. There are chats about that. I mean, how significant do you feel is that pattern, right? Because the other side of that is also woke washing, right? I mean, every brand is trying to get up and say something interesting, and capture imagination, getting huge backlash at times. So I have two questions there. I mean, one is that happening? Is it significant? Are consumers willing to pay for it, or are they saying it's fine? I mean, as far as there's an add-on, it's okay. I mean, it makes you more likable, but I'm not willing to pay a premium just because you're clean makeup, hypothetically, or just because your packaging is more environmentally conscious and doesn't take 10,000 years to degrade. Where are we, especially in India and on D2C brands, on that spectrum?
So I think India is slowly moving to that, but I don't think it's yet moved into saying I value the principles of the brand as much as I value what the product is about. Okay. But here are what I see as some of the early indicators. So things like clean label, things like, safety use are intrinsic parts of what the product is about. And consumers are willing to pay a premium for it. Okay. And a fairly substantial premium for things which are good for me in the product. But what I see brands doing is moving from proposition to purpose. And they're talking about what kind of values they believe in, what they will not do. And that, again, I think is very important. For example, one of the brands that at Fireside we have invested in is Mamaearth, which has been a sensational success. They started off by saying that we are safe to use. All the ingredients that we use are tested and proven to be safe to use. So it was about what is in the product. Now what they're talking about is goodness inside. And that is goodness inside the product, but also goodness inside the brand. And one of the things they've gone public with is saying that for every time you buy a Mamaearth product, we plant a tree for you. Okay? So because they recognize that consumers who value clean label, who value product safety, are essentially coming from a mindset which says this planet is hurting, supply chains are badly polluted, big brands have not been telling us what they should have been telling us. And therefore, there is that consciousness about what is happening around us. And that's not just about something very distant. It is something which is impacting me because these are things that I'm eating and putting on my skin and hair. And therefore, if there is a brand which says, I want to do good to the planet, right now, that talks to me. So to your point, I don't think they're still paying a premium for it, but they're more connected to it, more likely to come back to that brand, more likely to buy more products from that brand.
Yeah, that's interesting. You're saying good for me first and foremost, and then good for the context around me as second, and more traction for first, and then growing traction for the second as well. And the two kind of talk to each other, right? I mean, what's good for me, and now a sense of the fact that our environment has to be conducive as well, especially after pandemic. I think that consciousness is growing, definitely in the top tiers of the market. Yeah. We'll take a small break, and then this conversation is going very well. We'll come back and probe a few more concepts which are there in my mind. But we take a small break and come back.
Sure.
If you love cricket, listen up. The Edges and Sledges Cricket Podcast is here for you. Hosted by DJ, Varun, and me, Ashwin, we bring a fun, fresh fan's point of view to talking all things cricket. Sometimes it's just the three of us, sometimes we have guests, including current and former international cricketers. For new episodes every week, check out the Edges and Sledges Cricket Podcast on the IVM app, website, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Karan, welcome back to the conversation. And, I want to segue a bit into a polarizing thought in my mind. There are these big traditional players in the space of, consumer products, goods, right? Unilever, P&G, Dabur, Imami. A lot of them are homegrown, in fact, but quite large and behemoth. Marico, for example, right? And then we have this slew of new entrepreneurs emerging, right? Again, a couple of threads of thoughts there. One is, do you feel that for the traditional guys, it's time to be a little scared that the cheese being moved by the younger upstart, entrepreneurs, younger brands, and consumers are taking to them as well, right? And what's the sentiment there, or do you feel that finally is going to be a, like in India, everything is and not or? There will be a mutual coexistence of sorts, and maybe some shake of hands at the back of the curtain, right? Is that what's happening? And second, how do you think this new wave is different from the traditional big company wave that we saw, say, about a decade earlier? So I'd like to probe this whole dichotomy between the new and the legacy from your perspective.
I have enormous respect for Hindustan Lever or a Unilever and a Procter and Gamble. They've not been around for the 100 odd years without having seen different challenges, game changers happening, and figuring out a way to deal with that. So let me share with you some of the things that I see them doing to understand this changing world. First, there are many of these large legacy firms who have invested in funds like Fireside. And their reason for doing that is, of course, they want to make a return on the investment, and all of that is almost like hygiene for them. But they want to understand what is going on in the world of startups. They want to pick up lessons. They want to expose their top team to those lessons, right? So they want a window into this world, and an investment in a fund like ours gives them that very good window. But that's not all that they have been doing. They have been actually also been creating their own vehicles for investing in startups. So companies like Imami, like Wipro, like Unilever through Unilever Ventures, ITC, companies like Reckitt Benckiser. These have all been investing in startups. And again, the view is not necessarily that they want to acquire those companies, but again, they want to understand what all is happening out there, what is new on the horizon, what new propositions are coming in, but also what new technologies are coming in, what new ways of connecting are coming in. So they are just, at this point in time, if you like, this is their way of market research, right? But the big reason why they have not moved heavily into this area is because as organizations, they are built for scale. So they are looking at the opportunities which will move the needle for their organization and where their organization can actually execute extremely well. For example, if their focus on opportunity is about saying, how do we target the large middle of the pyramid in India? How do we get rural consumers to switch from not using a product to using a product? How do we get them to buy more of it? So that's their game. And their whole organization is built to scale that opportunity. Whereas all the startups are coming from saying, we are looking at micro segments. And therefore, the large companies are not built for targeting micro segments. Having said all of that, they're also looking at how to avail of the e-commerce opportunity. So over the last year and something, they all seen the e-commerce business tripling, right? And therefore, they're suddenly kind of saying, look, this is no longer something which we play at the edges. This is now on the CEO dashboard. And therefore, they are staffing up. They're looking at what kind of other capabilities are required to be brought into the organization to scale those opportunities. And they are engaging more purposefully with the e-commerce platforms to understand how all that is to be done. Similarly, many of them also launched their own, e-stores. And they're looking at how to engage with consumers, etc., etc. So I don't think they are kind of sitting still, but they're responding in a very calibrated manner, is my understanding.
Yeah. Would you also imagine, Kannan, that the fundamentals, even at the big CPG companies, would definitely undergo a change? I mean, for example, a GSK and a Unilever have now combined their distribution and sales because it didn't make sense to have independent sales and distribution organizations running. I mean, would you see with this new advent now the fact that you can pretty much outsource your distribution? There can be a third party brand which does a distribution for you. Would you think some of that changes, or say cycle of launches and agility there? We are already seeing, for example, we are definitely seeing that a lot of the CPG companies are very, very serious about digital as a conversation. I mean, because traditionally the whole CPG model was, mass media, and you can't go wrong with that. But that shift has already happened on ground. Do you imagine some of those fundamental shifts also go back at the core of how the entire industry, not just the startup world, is going to function?
So this is the organizational dilemma that they are sitting on, because Hindustan Lever control of its distribution system, its ability to sell a lot of mass market brands is very profitable and is going to continue to remain very profitable for a long time to come, right? But the fact is that India is getting more prosperous, and more people are sort of moving up the pyramid. In fact, it's not going to be a pyramid anymore. It's it's a funny shape. I think it's a tetrahedron or something of that kind. And really, poverty is shrinking in the country. And people with more disposable income are going to be the fastest, growing segment in this country. Right at the top of the pyramid, there was a study which said there was I think it was something like 30 million households earning something like 40,000 USD per year. And that could be, 60, 70, 80 million households in a few years' time. That is significant. Now, that is going to require different ways of connecting, different propositions, etc. Now, as a legacy firm, I'm sitting on a particular organizational model which is fit for a certain purpose. How do I create a separate organizational model which is going to target the top of the pyramid, which is no longer a small number, but a large number, and consuming in a very different way, consuming content, product, everything in a different way? And I think they have to think about how that organization is going to change. Let me just give you one part of the challenge. Most D2C companies today would have, for a relatively small business, let's call it 100 crores, maybe something like 60, 70 SKUs, which are live and active. Now, the Hindustan Levers of the world are used to one SKU being 100 crores, right? Now, I'm used to a factory super efficient, churning out that SKU 100 crores a year. Now, suddenly I've been told every few hours, stop, put on a different SKU. And that factory is therefore no longer that efficient. So now I need to create different kinds of factories, right? I need to bring in different kinds of manufacturing technologies which allow me to run with short production runs. And therefore, how do I do that? And, they'll work their way to it because that is the requirement. And I don't think the big companies have shied away from squaring up to what the future is. But it's going to take them some time to get there.
Yeah, because the shifts are far more fundamental and they're not easy to come by. I mean, you're right, because the whole theory has been around power brands, right? I mean, you, in fact, rationalize and you reduce and you globalize and you say, okay, let's build one power equity and let's see how many more markets, how many more geographies, and how many more propositions can you extend it, versus the whole idea, the whole energy in today's portfolio is because you have so many variants, you have so many offers, and you're constantly keeping your consumer excited, right? And pushing him or her even to impulse, so to say, even in categories such as skin and makeup, if you like. So you're right, it's a fundamentally a different game. I wanted to switch gears a bit, Kanan, and discuss the whole offline and online kind of a question here, right? Which is again another of those elephants in the room. So, I mean, starting from saying, I mean, I know I've done a lot of on-ground consumer work. I was trying to launch a turmeric-based soap called Manjal for Marico, right? And I was going down in Tamil Nadu, Kerala, doing deep research, focus group discussions. And the big insight was that every Indian woman felt that her skin was unique and nobody wanted to try something new. right? And they always wanted to go back to a Lux or a Hammam, which was the citadel of the market that point in time. But I also realized that skincare is a very tactile category, right? I mean, people want the touch, feel, smell. They want to try it on their skin. It's not so easy to switch. And here you have D2C brands, they're launching online. A large part of them haven't actually started offline, right? And they're doing D2C, doing very well. So I wanted to understand, is the touch and feel not required anymore? A. B. How does the online game interact with the offline? I mean, would all of these brands in time to come be omni-channel, for example, as we are now beginning to see in e-commerce, for example? Is that an inevitable shift? How do you feel is the online and offline world coming together or not in this game, if at all?
So you're asking me two questions.
Yes.
One is the power of the tactile. The second is omni-channel where it's headed.
Yeah, and is the consumer willing to suspend the power of the tactile in return for what?
So let me start with that first. Today's consumer looks at social approval ratings, and that gives him or her a lot of confidence that the product is something that many others have used and they like the product. Similarly, there is a huge number of influencers out there, and all the new age consumers are following influencers, micro, mega, celeb influencers, and that again gives them a lot of confidence that, look, this is a brand or this is a product which fits my requirements. So they're actually looking at the experience of many other people, some more expert, some like them, to help them understand whether the product will suit their skin. But interestingly, the new age companies also do a lot of sampling, right? And there are interesting vehicles which are emerging, like Smitten, right? Which is really a vehicle built for sampling. So you can go into Smitten and they would have at any time 20, 30, 40 brands where for a small shipping fee, you can get a set of 6 products for you to sample, right? So if you want the power of the tactile, you can actually get that. Many other companies also, what they do is you go onto a website, you like, let's say, their shampoo. So you buy the shampoo. Along with that, they'll ship you a sample of, let's say, a face wash, right? So they are, very focused on the tactile piece as well as the social approval piece to give people confidence that the products will have these sensorials that they're looking for. The other interesting piece, which I don't think is yet hit India, is technology. So L'Oreal has actually invested in this company in Canada, which, again, you download an app and you want to try a shade of lipstick, right? And you go to the catalog and say, I want to try, let's say, shade number L143. That app captures your image, it's like a mirror, and shows you what that shade will look like on your lips, right? So you're creating a virtual reality for people who want to have that. And that's again where different startups are experimenting with how to help people remain contactless. Because, the old world, you kind of just use what somebody else had used, and now you don't want to use that also. But how do you help people still get comfortable with what is out there? So I think that's where the power of the tactile is being facilitated in the new world by a combination of different tools, actually. Now, moving on to the omni-channel question, you're perfectly right, and I see that as well, that it's not either or, it is omni-channel. The traditional retail world is not just going to fold up and go. It's very much there. It's just going to operate in a different way for consumers, right? And therefore, what I see happening is brands are getting built in the digital space. They acquire a lot of consumers in the digital space. And that's very important for them because they're trying to communicate a whole set of not just proposition, but values that they stand for. And it's much easier to do in the digital space, right? Where consumers can go onto Amazon, they can kind of look at what is written out there. They can go onto the website, see what's written out there. And therefore, you get consumer buy-in through all of that. The content piece is very important. Whereas a classical 30-second ad doesn't allow you to do much of that, right? So you acquire the consumer understands you on the digital space, but then the consumer is going into a retail outlet to buy, and she may say, look, I want to buy a Mamaearth onion shampoo. Now, if it isn't available out there, the consumer may not wait to come back and order on Amazon or on the website. They may just grab whatever else is out there. So the brands have to track the consumer as a shopper and be available where they are. So having built the brand and having enabled the consumer to understand what the brand stands for, then you need to supply demand wherever the demand is going to arise. And that's why I see the D2C brands with a certain lag going into the offline space as well.
Yeah, it's very interesting. So you're saying digital can pretty much be the launch, and then so launch here and build here and then expand to omni-channel and get the business for the brand that you've already kind of built.
Absolutely. And if you don't, there is demand out there, which is going to perish. And interestingly, of course, we've seen the marriage of e-commerce and retail as well. We saw it in the West first with Amazon acquiring Whole Foods.
Yeah.
And then in India, we saw the marriage between Amazon and More through, that vehicle that they created. And more recently, we are seeing how this battle is going on for Big Bazaar between Amazon and Reliance, right? And it's all about saying that it's win-win, because having a physical presence with inventory closer to where the consumer lives enables us to supply demand very quickly. And therefore, for many categories, the consumer is not going to wait for 2 days and so on. I want a piece of soap, I want it now. I want a loaf of bread, I want it now, right? So they're trying to see how to satisfy that. But it's also win-win for that physical store, because you're now using that inventory and you're using also the staff who are, less utilized during the bulk of the day to generate more business for that store. And therefore, the economics of that store are also improving. And therefore, this is very, very synergistic. And I think that's what people are realizing.
Yeah. Karan, coming to the other core of what you do, which is investing, right? And that's really what you do now. The whole narrative in the funding and investing space is that, you chase products or you chase technology, right? If there's a technology moat, the bulk of the money in the world chasing is the technology moat. How do you see, you guys are doing consumer products, right? And so how do you see that difference? What are you really investing in? Are you still investing in technology, or are you investing in data? You're saying these are consumers we are owning, and what is the perspective behind that?
We are very old-fashioned, Dheeraj. We continue to believe in the power of brands.
Wow.
And we therefore are looking to invest where we think there can be a wonderful brand which can be built. Our vision is, can we be a part of the journey of creating the next 25 new generation brands out of India? And that's what we want to do. And we think we're already seeing some of that playing out. And we think that these could be brands which not just play locally, these could be brands which play globally. We already have invested in brands which actually don't do much business in India, but do a whole lot of business outside in the very competitive Western markets, right? So that, I think that's what we believe in, that's what we invest in.
That's awesome. And what would you suggest to somebody who's perhaps listening to our conversation and excited about entering the idea of consumer brands? What are the couple of watch outs and what are a couple of do's that you would recommend?
First, I think it's a great time to build consumer brands in India. I think there are a whole lot of Indians who are entering into a strongly consumerist society, and they're looking for choice. They're looking for propositions which work for them. And it's not just in FMCG, but it's about your home electronics. It's about your kids. It's about people who are in their 50s and suddenly find they've fulfilled family obligations. They've got a lot of money. They're looking for better vacations. So there is a new consuming class, and therefore there is a big, big opportunity out there. The two things I would say is think consumer insight and be very clear what is the consumer insight that you are building solutions for. It's easier, in my view, to build products. It's far more difficult to get your consumer insight right. If your insight is right, there are enough people who will help you build products, right? The second thing is, I would say, think digital for, I think, several reasons. First, if you are competing with established legacy players, the playing ground gets more level in the digital space. You don't have to fight the battle of the big bucks on TV. You don't have to fight the battle of getting into the offline space and so on. So it's much more easy to create and get your proposition across to consumers. Secondly, of course, it's much more easy to scale up because of the power of the internet. And the third thing I would say is much more capital efficient. So you consume, we're seeing this across companies, you scale faster and you consume less capital. If you've got a strong consumer insight, if you're brand focused, etc., then I think you can be very efficient in how you build your brand.
Yeah, and just a related question, is that what you see when you're investing as well, or do other factors come into play like the quality of team? I mean, but the other conversation on investing is that forget the product, forget the insight, all of that can keep pivoting. We'll invest behind a certain set of people. So what do you see when you put your money?
So here's my personal belief, and as you rightly say, there could be many others. I believe we're investing behind two things. We're investing in the strategy, right, which is all that I just mentioned. And we're investing behind the founders. We are coming in at a very early stage in the game. There isn't much proof of what has happened, success, etc., etc. And therefore, we have faith in the strategy. We also have faith in the founders. And between the two, faith in the founders is far more important. Because the strategy may be 100% effective, great. It may be 50% effective. Then you need the founders who can think their way through to making that strategy work, right? And therefore, for us, we would argue that both are important, but that the founders are certainly far more important.
Superb. Karan, thank you so much for this conversation. It's been a very, very interesting chat for 45 minutes, an hour. We take a break and we come back where you get the chance to grill me back. We always do that on this show. So we take a break and come back when the mic is yours.
I'm looking forward to that.
Hey, everybody, let me tell you a little bit about what happened on the IVM Podcast Network this week. We've had some amazing stuff, right? I mean, I don't know if you're aware of the redoing or the rebranding of the Traveling Professors show. We called it now Smarter with Sid, with Siddharth Deshmukh. This week, he examines Netflix getting into e-commerce, and will this affect how Amazon's dominating the space? Also, let me give you another quick hits to join up on. So on Siders Says, Siders was joined by Olympic equestrian Imtiaz Anis, and Nishan Budla from the Triangle Offense podcast showed up on Thursday's Cock and Bull to talk about the NBA Finals. On Nankari, Sadaf and Archie were joined by Keshav Chaturvedi of the Tere Mere Raste podcast. On Storytellers and Storytellers, Vineet talks to Ashim Mathur from Dolby. And don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Instagram to keep up with what's going on the network. And with that, let me also just finally thank our sponsors. They're what makes things possible. We'd like to thank Seat, Cred, Global Victoria, Bank of Baroda, Intuit India, and Lenovo. Thank you so much for making this possible.
Dheeraj, I have several questions, some of which have been triggered by what we just spoke about. The fact is that FMCG companies, as you rightly pointed out, are seeing different challenges and are trying to see how to transition to the new world. As a head of one of India's largest ad agencies, how do you see the change, and how do you see the transition that you also have to live through?
Yeah, no, that's been a big question, right? I mean, Karan, if you look at all our clients now, FMCG, etc., they're all now digitally led, right? And as an organization, a legacy-led organization, we've had to train 450 people into digital overnight almost, and it's been fighting against the muscle memory. So we are running several very deep training programs. We've hired a lot of new talent from new age contexts, right? We have invested a lot of time, effort, and resources in deep tie-ups with platforms. So we figured that if we can understand Facebook, if we can understand Reels, if we can understand Amazon as an advertising platform, if we can understand IVM podcasts as a platform, then we can help brands on these platforms. So rather than go digital as a whole piece, we've built specializations into these platforms, and we know how to build traction for brands on these platforms. So that's one piece of work on talent, training, and tie-ups, which has gone into repurposing the organization. The other piece also is we realized that a lot of these startups, right, they weren't getting quality strategy inputs. So we've launched something what I call Leo Burnett Consult, where it's a very quick, agile strategy product where we help startups get the initial launch package in terms of how to launch, what could be your proposition, what could be your product thinking, and so on and so forth. And that then is clubbed with a digital launch module. So these two coming together have made the access much more easier than a classical agency client partnership of a retainership where you have artwork costs and so on and so forth. And when you're navigating a new startup brand, you really don't want to navigate any of that.
But these are two worlds, right? One is this classical world, which still exists, of what I call the 30-second TVC, which generally turns out to be a 40-second TVC, right? And I need to go through all the testing and everything else. And then the new world where I'm doing A/B testing, come on quick, let's put some content out there kind of stuff. How do these two worlds coexist in one agency?
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, at some stage, you have to take sides, right? And we have consciously gone ahead and we've said that we are India's #1 new age agency. So we're saying that even when we're working for our traditional clients, we try and do a TV which has a Twitter feedback, or we try and do a mass campaign like we did for, say, Spotify. It was a campaign which started on billboards, playlist for that, went on to digital to create conversation and close the loop. So we're saying even when we do traditional work, we do it with the edge of new age, with the edge of technology. And it has happened that we have lost a certain pitch when someone felt that, we are very good in new age, but we may not be so good on traditional. So there is, no matter how much I might hedge at this point in time, I mean, we do have a lot of traditional clients, etc. But the skew of the agency has been new age.
Very interesting. Which brings me to the next challenge that I am seeing some of the agencies probably having to encounter, which is I find some of the startups that at least I deal with, as they grow to a certain scale, they want to bring content creation in-house. So they have their own copywriters, they have their own videographers. They want to do stuff in-house because you just believe that even the small startup agencies who are only digital are just not fast enough for them. So as these companies become larger and larger, is that going to be a threat for you?
So we have, in fact, at this point in time, there are many clients, several clients who have an outfit of their own within the organization and are at the same time also engaging with us. And they are engaging with the internal agency, so to say, on a more day-to-day, everyday kind of stuff. And they're engaging with us on ideas which are, say, 2 days, 3 days gestation period. So two things have happened there. One is agencies like ourselves have also geared up to agility. So, I mean, for example, our social media division would churn out, say, 300 pieces of content for somebody like Josh, which is Delhi Hunt's platform, in a month. So we will have an internal team in tie-up with what we call Content Factory, which develops agile and efficient content, and that system is geared to deliver that, right? But I think where brands find value in us is in being able to give them ideas which travel on their own, which have traction, which float on their own, which can sit somewhere between a positioning and engagement and help them bridge that. It's not just a large 60-second point of view which doesn't move anybody, but it comes from a certain sense of purpose, but has action built in it, what we call acts. For example, to give you an example, for Shadi.com, we built a platform called Weddings from Home during the pandemic, because we realized that weddings in India are about Mahurat, and Indians want a big fat wedding. I mean, India, a wedding is not on paper. So we transitioned the whole marriage idea with mehndi, sangeet, dance, everything online, and built a product around that. So we've now learned to build purpose and agility together, and that's where a lot of new age clients are finding our services valuable.
Now, a lot of the money that the new age companies spend is on performance marketing. And then there is this constant work which is being done to optimize on different platforms, your spends, your responses, etc., etc. And again, companies seem to think that, look, I want my team to be looking at how to optimize spends and how to, be responsible for that P&L and things of that kind. So does that again mean that some of the work that agencies like used to do, which is like media planning, media buying, that's sort of migrating away?
We see that Kandan, in early stage startups, but we're also seeing a lot of startups who are now beginning to get traction and want to go to the next level. And they do definitely want an expert opinion on saying, how do we optimize this better? We've also seen, for example, with brands such as Acko, we've seen, Kandan, that the moment we've run a brand narrative piece, the cost of acquisition on performance has gone down. Right? Because once the consumer is aware of the brand, about a certain purpose or a feature, etc., the performance cost has gone down as well. So we've also helped clients optimize on that piece as well. The Josh piece that I spoke to you about is actually sits between brand and performance. And we deliver 500 assets between static and video every month. And it's now one of the top 10 most downloaded apps globally. Not just on the back of this, but definitely this has had a role to play. So I feel that once a brand is ready to step to the next level, when they feel that there's a need for certain expertise, and we've come some distance to become agile as an agency, and we don't reside in the same world of that will take 6 days to crack one hashtag.
I'm so glad to hear that. I was wondering, therefore, what does it do for your revenue structure, your fee structure? Is it all getting more very specific performance led?
Yeah. So, I have, as a function of strategy, in fact, agencies were always scared of projects, right? I mean, it was seen as a bad, our whole thing was to wed a client into a retainership relationship, and anything else was seen as, not so good. I have, in fact, embraced projects. So 30% of my revenue actually comes from projects. And what I call these as project-based relationships. So there are a lot of new age clients who come and engage with us. So they would do strategy and first launch and then go away and then come back 3 months again later and again do another big piece and go away. And so it's a project-based relationship. We don't engage perhaps on a retainer, but we engage when they feel it's critical to engage us, and they continue with work. So that's one big shift which has happened. Second, obviously, is skin in the game. Bulk of our contracts now they have a KRA in it, and the KRA goes all the way to sales, right? So I have been in rooms where the CEOs ask me that if I put this money on this campaign, will I get 10 million downloads? And I've had to think through and say yes, and we have delivered that. So I think because the money you're putting, you cannot anymore put this on link test. Those days are gone. So you have to be responsible for MAUs, you have to be responsible for the downloads, and therefore you have to think through of the idea and the campaign in a way that will move the needle. So that change has definitely happened.
I think that's fantastic because that is always the question in the minds of CMOs and CEOs, which is, I'm putting in the money and the agency takes a fee, and in the good old days, just are cut out of their spends and so on. So to see you guys now standing up for skin in the game is just really amazing. My last question to you, Dheeraj, is this world of startup brands is also full of influencers. There's a whole influencer industry. How do you guys play in that industry?
So we have a tie-up. So what has happened beautifully, Kannan, is that now if you look at a suite of products the agency offers, I mean, through say a Leo Burnett, a client is now able to do performance, able to do content, able to do production, able to do influencer marketing, all through my window, and getting a greater value than they would go and aggregate all of these services outside of us, because we have preferential volume based tie-ups with platforms who deliver this for us. But more importantly, our thinking and creative systems, they integrate this for the client in a brand way. Right, so we are now moving towards is a single, full funnel solution through a single throat to choke. So, in fact, what happened, which I feel much to the detriment of both clients and agencies, the defragmentation of separating a creative agency from a media agency, from a digital agency to an influence agency. At one point in time, one of my clients used to handle 17 agencies during their sale period. So they used to pack in a few Bermudas and stay in the office. And that's when I realized that the agency needs to be full funnel. And that's what we built back through a slew of tie-ups and specializations, Kannan. So we also play in influencer, we play in content development, we play in production, we play in programmatic, and we do full funnel solution for the clients now.
Wonderful. Hope to have Leo Burnett work on some of the Fireside brands in the near future, Dheeraj.
Absolutely. That'll be amazing. So great to have you on board, Kannan. Fantastic conversation, and thank you for doing this.
My pleasure.
One of the biggest learnings from this conversation is that the barriers to enter and succeed have come down dramatically. You could launch your products without having to own the R&D and the distribution, unlike earlier times. You don't even need to have a large bulk order. You can work with suppliers who can build products to your specifications and provide you smaller runs so that you can experiment and succeed. You can also experiment with different advertising stimulus over weeks and figure which one works better. The world of D2C brands is all about speed to launch and speed to learn. We also learned that online is a great space to be building these brands. But once you've built the brand and you have the demand, you would like to be present where the consumer is, be it an offline store or direct to consumer channels. This means that most of what we see as online players today would actually go omni-channel, even if with a lag. One of the biggest revelations for me was about the consumer's trust in the legacy brands, which as it turns out was nothing more perhaps than familiarity. In fact, with greater degree of transparency on the part of the D2C brands in terms of their ingredients and so on, questions are being asked of the legacy brands about their ingredients. It's very interesting how the startup brands are reframing the idea of trust through transparency and honesty rather than through time. So if you have a lurking idea in your mind about building a consumer brand, perhaps it's time to build a strategy and pull a team together. Because as I learned today, there was never a better time to launch a consumer brand in India. What thoughts did this conversation trigger in your mind? Do tag me on my Twitter handle Dheeraj_Sinha or leave your comments at speakeasywithdheerajsinha.com. If you like this podcast, you can explore other amazing podcasts on the IVM Podcast app and website. You can follow them on social media at IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. Thanks for listening.
We live in an age of disruption, of immense change in every aspect of work, life, and business. But is the old way of doing things truly dead? And are we ever going to stop saying the new normal? Join me, Varun Dugirala, on Advertising is Dead every Tuesday as I talk to entrepreneurs, leaders, creators, and change makers from across business, media, marketing, and beyond to dig a little deeper into how we got here, what we're doing now, and where we're headed. You can catch all the episodes of Advertising is Dead on the IVM Podcast website, app, or wherever you get your podcast from.
पेश खिदमत है आपकी शान में हमारे अंजुमन से। हाय, आई एम सदफ
एंड आई एम अर्शिद। खाने का इतिहास, इकोनॉमिक्स, पॉलिसी, साइकोलॉजी सब है मेन्यू पे।
ओनली ऑन द नानकारी पॉडकास्ट एवरी वेडनेसडे, सिर्फ IVM पॉडकास्ट ऐप या वेबसाइट पर, या फिर जहां से भी आप अपने पॉडकास्ट सुनते हो।